When Amelia Rhodes marries a charming British stranger named James Holloway after a whirlwind romance, she thinks she's found true love, until he vanishes without a trace, leaving behind a trail of lies, multiple identities and heartbroken women across 2 continents. What begins as heartbreak turns into a gripping hunt for justice, as Amelia uncovers the shocking truth. Her husband was never who he claimed to be. Amelia Rhodes had always been cautious with her heart. After a string of hollow relationships and nights spent wondering if real love even existed, she'd quietly given up. But that December night, something in her shifted. The wind howled outside her Brooklyn apartment, a cruel reminder of how alone she was. On impulse, she downloaded a dating app. Her thumb hovered over the screen longer than usual, before she swiped right on a man with soft brown eyes and a jawline like it had been sculpted for the movies. His name was James Holloway. British, he said, and in town for business. She didn't expect him to respond, certainly not within seconds. But he did. Polite, warm, and wickedly funny. He spoke like he'd known her for years, weaving comfort into every message. Amelia found herself waiting for his replies like a teenager again, her heart fluttering at every ping. He was nothing like the others. He listened. He noticed. He remembered. Within days they were talking for hours each night. Amelia began to wonder if she was dreaming, or worse, if she was being foolish. But the way James spoke made her believe in things she had locked away. Trust, connection, maybe even fate. The first time they met in person, her breath caught. He looked just like his photos, but more real, more grounded. He wore a navy coat, smelled like cedarwood, and held her gaze like she was the only person in the world. They spent the weekend exploring the city, coffee in Soho, long walks through Central Park, late-night wine on her balcony. With every passing hour, Amelia's walls crumbled. She told herself it was reckless, but her heart wouldn't listen. James seemed to fall just as hard. He called her his North Star one night under twinkling fairy lights, and she felt her past slowly melt away. It was his idea to marry quickly. He said he had to return to the UK for work, but didn't want to leave her behind. "Let's not waste time," he whispered. Amelia hesitated. It was too fast. Her friends would think she'd lost her mind, but he held her hands, looked into her soul, and said, "When you know, you just know." And she believed him. God help her. She believed every word. They married in a quiet Manhattan courthouse. No white dress, no flowers, just a signed paper, 2 hearts racing, and a stranger from the street, who served as their witness. It felt like a movie scene, imperfect, impulsive, yet heartbreakingly beautiful. James kissed her hand afterward, promising they'd laugh about their quick wedding one day over champagne and a big family dinner. That night, as they lay wrapped in blankets, Amelia stared at the ceiling, unsure if she was the luckiest woman alive or the most naive. Her heart felt full, yet something inside whispered caution. But love is loud, and doubt is quiet. And in that moment, she chose love. She had no idea she'd just married a lie. Amelia woke up to silence. The kind that doesn't just fill a room but presses against your chest like a weight. James had always left little notes when he went out. Something sweet, scribbled on a napkin, a playful message on the bathroom mirror. But that morning, there was nothing. No coffee brewing, no sounds of humming in the kitchen, no trace of him, just an untouched pillow and a chill in the air that made her pull the blanket tighter around her. She told herself not to panic. Maybe he'd gone for a walk. Maybe he forgot his phone. Maybe he had a surprise planned. But hours passed. The phone went straight to voicemail. His social media had vanished overnight. His apartment, which once smelled like aftershave and late-night pasta, now felt hollow, like it had never been lived in. His suitcase was gone. So were the shirts she had folded for him, the watch he kept on the nightstand, the passport he showed her when they booked their weekend trip to Vermont. Panic came slowly, then all at once. Her chest ached as she dialed every number he had ever given her, each ring echoing her growing fear. How could someone disappear so completely? She searched hospitals, called the police, but without a real emergency or evidence of harm, there was little they could do. They didn't understand he wasn't just missing. He had erased himself. Within 2 days, Amelia was on a plane to Manchester. He had told her it was where he grew up. The address he'd once shown her, scribbled in his handwriting, was supposed to be home. But when she arrived, the street was real, yet the number led to a flower shop. The woman behind the counter blinked when she asked for James Holloway. "No one by that name lives here," she said. Amelia thanked her, trying to hold in her panic, but her legs nearly gave out the moment she stepped outside. In the following days, Amelia searched everything: public records, property listings, social networks. She reached out to every Holloway in the region, desperate for a thread, a clue, anything. That's when she stumbled upon a local news article online. It wasn't front page, but it hit her like a punch to the gut. A man, different name, same face. Daniel Hartwell, wanted in connection with fraud and identity theft, last seen in Brighton, known for marrying women, stealing from them, then vanishing. Her stomach turned. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled. There was no mistake. The man in the blurred photo was James, or Daniel, or whatever name he was using now. The charming, gentle husband she had shared a bed with wasn't just gone. He had never existed, not really. Her love story wasn't just over. It had been a performance. She had been the audience, the target. Standing alone in a foreign city, with nothing but her broken heart and a stranger's name, Amelia felt the weight of betrayal sink deep into her bones. It wasn't just about being left. It was about being fooled, lied to, manipulated, and somehow, even in the shock of it all, she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't let him get away with it. London felt heavier than New York. The buildings stood taller, older, with secrets etched into their stones. Amelia moved through the streets like a ghost, a stranger among the noise and history. Every footstep felt like chasing shadows, but she had no choice. Her heart had been torn open, and her mind refused to rest until she found answers. James or Daniel had disappeared, but she wasn't going to be another silent name in his story. She started with the banks. Quiet inquiries, nervous questions. Her voice always shaking slightly when she gave his supposed name. Some places brushed her off. Others looked concerned but offered nothing. It was a pattern: hesitation, then vague apologies. But in one small bank near Kensington, a young clerk pulled her aside. He couldn't share details, he said, but the look in his eyes said enough. He recognized the man in her photo. That gave her hope. Not enough to feel safe, but just enough to keep going. She rented a tiny room above a bookstore, spent her days scanning records, old newspaper archives, and dating forums. Each night she cried quietly, a mix of shame, sorrow, and rage swelling in her chest. How had she believed him? How had she fallen so easily into a trap? She kept hearing his voice, remembering his touches, the way he had once looked at her like she was the center of his world. Was it all acting, or was there ever a moment when it had been real? One evening, while digging through an old online forum about scam marriages, Amelia found a post that stopped her breath. A woman in Wales had described her husband with eerie familiarity: charming British accent, whirlwind romance, sudden disappearance. The photos were pixelated, but it was him. The same crooked smile. The same eyes. She contacted the woman, who never replied, but the post gave her another city, another trail. In a cafe in East London, she overheard a bartender talking about a man who used to bring different women in each week. Always well-dressed. Always different stories. Amelia showed his photo. The bartender nodded. "He called himself Marco here," he said. "Haven't seen him in months. One of the women he brought in, she cried at the bar once. Said she lost everything." Every story was the same. Different names, different cities, but the same broken hearts and emptied bank accounts. Amelia realized Daniel wasn't just a conman. He was a collector of affection, of trust, of lives left in ruins. She no longer felt like a victim. She felt like a witness, a historian to the pain he left behind. Each step she took, each person she spoke to, she felt the weight of all the women before her, and all the women who would come next, unless someone stopped him. She wasn't just tracing his past anymore. She was preparing for the moment when their paths would cross again, because deep inside her rising pain, a new flame had lit. Amelia wasn't chasing love anymore. She was chasing justice. The city of Leeds was gray when Amelia arrived, cold and silent, the kind of weather that seeps into your bones and makes you question everything. She hadn't slept properly in days. Her eyes burned from scanning screens, from crying in strange hotel rooms, from trying to piece together a puzzle that kept changing shape. But something about this place felt different. A tip from a disgruntled landlord had pointed her here. He had rented out a flat to a man named Alex Wren. Another name, another lie, but the face in the ID photo had been unmistakable. Daniel. Amelia stood outside the narrow brick apartment block, her breath visible in the icy air. Every instinct told her to turn back, to protect whatever pieces of herself she still had left. But she had crossed the line where fear turns into determination. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Harder this time. A woman opened the door, young, tired eyes, her face pale with confusion. Her name was Sophie. And when Amelia said the name James Holloway, her reaction wasn't anger, it was fear. She faltered, stepped back like she had seen a ghost. For a long second, they just stared at each other, two strangers joined by the same betrayal. Amelia noticed the slight curve of Sophie's stomach. She was pregnant. Inside, the flat smelled like lemon and laundry. There were pictures on the walls, Sophie and Daniel smiling at a park, at a beach, even one where he kissed her cheek. It felt surreal. Amelia studied the photos, feeling sick. The same gestures, the same charm, just a new backdrop. She had lived this too in another city, in another lie. Sophie didn't believe her at first. She defended him with a kind of desperate faith. Amelia remembered all too well. She said he was good to her, that he was coming back soon, that he talked about building a future. But Amelia didn't argue. She simply pulled out a folder. Marriage certificate, photos of her and Daniel in New York, copies of his messages, bank transfers made in her name, a pattern impossible to deny. The silence that followed was suffocating. Sophie stared at the documents with trembling hands. Her face crumbled lowly, the color draining from her cheeks. Tears spilled without sound. She wasn't angry, not at first, just broken, like Amelia had been. They talked for hours, about the way he smiled when he lied, about the dreams he sold so convincingly, about how it felt to be chosen, only to realize it was never real. Amelia listened more than she spoke, and when Sophie finally looked her in the eyes and said, "I think I believed in him more than I believed in myself," Amelia gently took her hand. That night, Amelia didn't feel alone for the first time in weeks. Pain had brought them together, but something else began to grow in its place. Strength, understanding. They weren't just women left behind by the same man, they were witnesses to each other's truth, and as they sat together in the quiet, Amelia knew she had found more than a clue. She had found an ally. The Florida heat clung to Amelia's skin the moment she stepped off the plane in Miami. It was a stark contrast to the cold numbness she felt inside. The tip about a private vault registered to one of Daniel's fake identities had come through a financial trace. Sophie had managed to uncover something about an offshore transaction that had briefly touched an American account. It was a long shot, but Amelia had learned by now that Daniel left just enough breadcrumbs behind for someone stubborn enough to follow. And she was nothing if not stubborn now. The vault was housed in a discreet private facility downtown. No signs, no fanfare, just a long hallway behind a receptionist desk and a keycard panel. Amelia had come prepared. She carried with her a binder of documents, a marriage license, identification papers, legal authorizations, and proof of fraud. She didn't look like a woman seeking justice. She looked like someone trying to survive something invisible. The manager hesitated at first, But once he saw the depth of her evidence and contacted the fraud division, he agreed to unlock the vault. The metallic door swung open with a hiss. Inside, the small, dimly lit room contained a simple safe deposit box, heavier than it looked. Amelia's hands trembled as she opened it. She had no idea what she expected, money perhaps or more passports, but what lay inside chilled her far more than any stack of bills. There were envelopes, dozens of them, each one neatly labeled with a different woman's name. Marissa, Olivia, Julia, Harper, Isabel. Her name was there too, Amelia Rhodes. She stared at it, frozen. Inside her envelope, she found copies of their wedding photos, a duplicate of her ID, bank statements, and notes written in Daniel's hand. Cold, precise summaries of her habits, trusts easily, loyal, good with detail. It was like reading her own obituary, written by someone who never saw her as human. Among the papers were fake passports, all with his photo but different names. Dozens of identities, dozens of lives. There were luxury watches tucked in a velvet pouch, SIM cards labeled with numbers and USB drives. But one name stood out from the rest. Dr. Elise Morton. Her envelope was untouched, new. A recent photo was clipped to it. Elise smiling in front of a hospital in Houston. Amelia's breath caught. He wasn't finished. He was still doing it, still weaving his lies, still setting his traps. Elise had no idea what was coming. Leaving the vault, Amelia felt both powerful and shattered. She had walked into the heart of his deception and uncovered the skeletons of all the lives he had stolen. The part that ached most wasn't just that she was one of many, but that he had a system, a method. Love was never part of it. None of it had been real. But now, she held something stronger than pain. She had proof. And with Elise's name in her hand, she had a chance to stop him before he did it again. She wouldn't be too late this time, not again. The morning of the wedding felt like a countdown to something inevitable. Amelia stood outside the White Chapel in Houston, her hands clenched tightly around her purse, her heart beating so fast it almost drowned out the sound of passing cars. The Texas sun was hot on her shoulders, but all she could feel was cold dread crawling beneath her skin. Inside, the final preparations for the ceremony were underway, flowers being arranged, music rehearsed, guests arriving in carefully pressed suits and pastel dresses. They had no idea. Dr. Elise Morton was smart, successful, respected in her community. She had built a life Amelia could only admire from afar, an esteemed surgeon, loved by her patients, admired by her peers. She didn't look like someone who could be tricked, but Amelia knew all too well how love blinded even the strongest. She had made contact just days before, sending an anonymous message. First, no response. Then a second message, direct this time, honest, and filled with the evidence she had gathered. Photographs, bank records, passport scans, even voice recordings. But Elise hadn't replied. Amelia feared she hadn't believed her, or worse, had chosen not to. But something told her Elise had read it. Inside, the music began to play softly. Amelia stepped into the chapel quietly, unnoticed. She sat in the very back, barely able to breathe. It was a beautiful place, polished wood, stained glass casting soft colors on the pews, white roses lining the aisle. It felt sacred, and yet she knew the man about to walk through those doors was the opposite of everything this moment represented. Then he appeared, Daniel, or James, or Marco, or whatever he was calling himself now. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, hair combed perfectly, that familiar confident smile tugging at his lips. He looked the same, too much the same, as if none of what he'd done had touched him at all. Amelia felt the air thicken. She watched as Elise emerged from the side room, radiant and calm. Her white dress catching the light, her expression didn't waver, not even as their eyes met for a fraction of a second. Then she turned toward the aisle. Her steps were slow, deliberate. Everyone in the room stood. The music swelled. Halfway down, she stopped. Gasps rippled through the guests. Elise turned, her voice clear, but trembling. "This man is not who he says he is," she said, looking directly at Daniel. "His name is not William Crane. He is a criminal. He's wanted for fraud, bigamy, and identity theft." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Daniel's face froze. Panic flickered in his eyes, just for a second. He stepped back, muttering something no one could hear, and turned. But the doors had already swung open. Officers entered quickly, weapons holstered, hands ready. There was no time to run. They cuffed him without struggle. He didn't fight. He didn't shout. He just stood there, eyes cold, staring not at the officers but at Amelia, as if somehow this was her fault, not his. But Amelia didn't look away. She held his gaze until they took him out of the building. The room was still. Elise stood at the front of the aisle, tears in her eyes, but her hands steady, and for the first time in a long time, Amelia felt the weight begin to lift. Chicago welcomed Amelia with rain. Not the soft, romantic drizzle that made city lights glow, but the heavy, relentless kind that soaked into her coat and shoes as she stepped out of the courthouse. People rushed past, umbrellas bobbing like floating shields, but Amelia didn't move. She stood in the downpour for a moment, breathing in the cold air, letting it wash away something invisible. The last traces of the man who had once made her feel special, cherished, loved. Daniel Hartwell had been sentenced to 35 years. The judge's voice had been steady, his words clear, but Amelia barely heard them. Her eyes had stayed locked on Daniel, watching him sit expressionless, his face carved in stone. No regret, no apology, not even surprise. He hadn't looked at her once, not even when her statement had been read aloud, not even when she told the court how he made her question her worth, her sanity, her ability to ever trust again. Now that it was over, she expected to feel free. But what she felt instead was a strange emptiness, a quiet, hollow space where rage had once lived. She had spent months chasing a ghost, following the trail of a man who didn't truly exist, and now that the chase was over, she wasn't sure who she was without it. Back at her apartment, the silence felt unfamiliar. The case had consumed her for so long, early mornings combing through records, sleepless nights drafting letters, calls with victims across oceans. One by one, they had come forward. Sophie, Elise, a woman in Italy, another in Boston. Each story unique, but all woven together by the same man and the same lies. Amelia had written every name down in a journal, her own way of remembering that they weren't just numbers or news articles. They were real, like her. The story had gone viral, an international web of deceit, a modern-day predator cloaked in charm and Zender suits. Reporters had hounded her for interviews. She had done a few, carefully chosen, but avoided the spotlight. She didn't want fame, she wanted truth, healing, justice. Still, something in her shifted when she received an email from a young woman in Canada. It was short, almost hesitant. "Your story saved me. I was about to marry someone with the same pattern. Your foundation gave me the courage to walk away." Amelia read it 3 times, tears streaming down her cheeks. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She had become a voice, a warning, a light. She launched a non-profit from her small apartment, built slowly from nothing but pain and purpose. She called it Second Light, for all the women learning to love again, not others but themselves. It became a refuge for women duped by online scams, emotional predators, romantic fraud. Amelia never heard from Daniel again. He remained silent behind bars, locked in a cell, far from the lives he once fractured, but she no longer needed his words. She had found her, and though she had once loved a lie, she now lived in truth, with scars that whispered of survival and a strength she never knew she had.